Good evening, everyone. I'm Jan De Silva. I'm Chair of the Community Preservation Committee, and welcome to our FY23 application workshop. And here we will be talking about what's expected of applicants, what they can look forward to, answer some questions, get a sense of what we have, find out how much money we're anticipating giving away in the next round, and hopefully you'll be walking away with a lot of information. If you're not aware, on our website, which is on the City of New Bedford website, Community Preservation Committee, we have our FY23 plan up there for you, so you can review and see what kind of projects we've done in the past, what we're funding, and what we look for, the 4 areas that we look to fund applications in. I'm actually not going to do this. I'm just introducing the committee, and I'm going to be turning the meeting over to Jessica Bailey, who is our amazing, wonderful, I'm trying to think of some more superlatives, amazing, wonderful CPC coordinator who will assist any applicants with the application process. And she keeps us all on track and is always willing to answer any questions, either from the committee or from the general public. So, Jessica, you ready to come up here?
All right. You're welcome. So, thank you, Jan. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming tonight. So we're going to go over a few things. I'm mostly going to talk, but you will have an opportunity to do a question and answer as you can either ask as we go, or you can wait till the end. It does not matter to me. And I'll take a question and repeat it so that everyone can hear it. We're going to talk about the process. It is a 2-part process because applications are, they're not complicated, but we do ask a little bit of information. So what we try to do is just make sure that you're on track before you even begin the process. So that's the eligibility determination. That's step 1. And then step 2 is the actual application. We'll talk about how the funding is awarded, the post-award, and a little bit of other information. So for those of you who don't know, CPA legislation was enacted just over 20 years ago, and it's a smart growth tool that enables communities to really target the areas in which they need assistance. Could be historic preservation, could be affordable housing, open space preservation, or recreational opportunities. And all of those things are allowed under CPA legislation. And each community can determine what they need to spend that money on. It's not dictated by the state, it's dictated by the CPA plan, which is put together by your CPC every year. And your Community Preservation Committee is made up of volunteers, and we have a number of them in the audience tonight. You met Jan De Silva, who's our chair, Arthur Glassman, who represents our planning board, Melissa Chester-Latondra, who is a general public representative, Jody Seifert, who is also a general public representative, and Leona Fisher, who represents the Housing Authority. By state legislation, we have to have representatives from those various boards and commissions listed so that we can provide a well-rounded plan. So every year before we start the plan, we go to those boards and commissions and say, what are your goals and needs? Have they changed from last year? And looking at what we have in the CPA plan, what do you need us to change? And they provide us with that input. And additionally, we also do a public hearing every June where we invite the public to come and give us feedback about what they see are the goals and needs in our community within the 4 CPA categories. The CPC has 4 main responsibilities, and those responsibilities are to assess the community needs and develop that plan, to prepare an annual budget for the City Council, and to make project recommendations to the City Council. This is the very first step in the FY23 process of making those recommendations to City Council. And the City Council, at the end of it all, can approve a recommendation, they can reject a recommendation, or they can reduce the funding to a recommendation. They are not allowed to add recommendations that weren't sent to them by the CPC, nor are they allowed to add money to a recommendation. That is within the state legislation. It's not something that's just for New Bedford. It's every community has to live by those that statute. There's 2 sources of funding that CPA comes through. One is the 1.5% surcharge on the amount or the value above $100,000 for a property within our community. And that was voted on by the voters of New Bedford back in 2014. And then additionally, we also have the State Trust Fund. The State Trust Fund this year, we anticipate there'll be a 35% match of funding that will come to our community. And over the last, so this is our 5th, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, this is our 6th funding round. And in our first 5 funding rounds, we have more than a dollar for dollar match of CPA dollars that were put into our community that those nonprofits then received matching funds of just over, we have 6.8 that's gone out, and we have just over 6.9 that's been matched. So we've more than 1-for-1 matched what has been put out into the community. And that's money that wouldn't necessarily come into New Bedford if we didn't have CPA in our community. By statute, we have to divide the budget up. So the budget is divided up, and 65% goes to budgeted reserve, and that can be spent in any of the categories. So we in New Bedford, the CPC has taken to doing just the 10% for each of the open space, community housing, historic preservation. Because once you put it in one of those reserve categories of those 3, you only can spend it in those categories. So they put that 10% in, and then they keep the other 65% so they can use it, because we never know in any given year how much we're going to get requested in a particular category. So we put the minimum of 10% in, and then that other 65 can be distributed amongst those categories. And then there is a 5% administrative fee that covers my salary, administrative costs, printing and copying and things of that nature. This year, we're pretty excited that we have another $1.7 million to spend. And that is made up of both the local surcharge, the state match, which is coming in at just over $420,000, the fund balance, which is monies that wasn't spent in previous years, that rolls into that account to be used in future allocations. Last year, we did not spend all the money in the open space and recreation reserve. There weren't enough projects that were recommended. So those funds are set aside and can be used for this year's open space and recreation projects. And then program administration costs, typically we have that 5%. We've never actually used the full 5%, and that rolls over at the end of the year back into the fund balance. And at the end of the year, we think we have about $1.7 million. And that's broken up into the various categories. You have your open space and recreation, which has both the rollover from last year as well as this year's $162,099, which is as well as the other 2 categories have that same amount. And then the budget reserve is just over 1.1 million, I guess, and it can go into any of these 3 categories. And then the fund balance can also be used in any of the 3 categories.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Jim from YMCA South Coast. Is there a max that one organization can request from those bubbles?
There is not a max that one organization can request, but every organization be very cognizant of the fact that typically we get at least 2 dozen, sometimes more applications, and there is always a difference of 1.7, and we'll have somewhere around $3 million in asks. So the CPC is very aware of the need, and they try to spread the wealth as much as they can to enable a project to move forward with enough funding, but not give so much that somebody else is going to miss. There's a number of factors, and I can go over those, but there's not a max. But it's, I don't know, I think the most we've ever given for a grant, 300,000? 375, and that was the acquisition of land for the Acushnet Sawmill project. That was the very first year. Was that right? CDC building. CDC was around 300,000. So that's been where they've fallen in terms of, but it also every year depends on the number of applications, depends on the funding requests. It's not an answer that I can say this is what they always do, but historically. And you can see on the website Jan had mentioned, the previous plans are all on the very bottom of the first web page. And within that is the annual report for the previous year. And you can see what projects were funded and how much was funded. In addition, in the drop down at the top, The applications from FY22 are still up so that you can see them as examples of what the applications look like, what the information that was provided was, so that it helps guide you as you're putting the application together. So let's talk about projects, because tonight's all about eligibility. So I like to talk about the action words right here, your verbs. This is how you determine whether or not your project is eligible. And of course, it looks really simple to me and the CPC members because we've been looking at it for a long time, 2016 in some cases. For the rest of you, it may not feel as simple, and that's okay. I'm happy to answer any questions. My information is in the packets. My phone number, I did not remember business cards today. I'm very sorry about that, but my phone number is there, and you can always call me or you can email me. So if you look at this use table, and this use table comes from the Department of Revenue, who oversees how CPA money can be spent in a community. It talks about, for example, if you want to preserve something like open space, historic resources, recreational opportunities, or housing, yes, all of those are eligible. However, in some cases, you can't create historic resources, but you can create open space, you can create recreational opportunities, you can create community housing. Support is typically not allowed, maintenance, things of that nature. However, under housing, and if anybody has a housing project, I'm happy to talk offline with you because it is incredibly complicated, and unless you want to learn more about it, I'm just going to say I'm always available to talk to anybody about that. But housing, yes, you can use it for support, but it's in very specific ways. And then rehabilitation. And as you can see here, again, there's the caveat, yes, you can rehabilitate or restore open space only if it was acquired or created with CPA funds. Or you can rehabilitate or restore housing only if it was acquired or created with CPA funds, and that's all within the state legislature. So if you have a project, say, let's see, a recreational opportunity. I know that there's a couple of schools that are fundraising right now for new playgrounds in our community, in the elementary schools. So those projects would be eligible under recreation, and we'd be creating them or rehabilitating them, depending on what work needs to be done. For a historic preservation project, if it's preserving it, absolutely you can preserve it. It's not just a building. CPA, and we can talk about this, considers artifacts as a historic resource. We've given money to the schooner Ernestina in the very first year for her rehabilitation, and she's actually on her way home, thankfully, after many years. We have provided funding to the library for whaling logbooks to be digitized and to be archived properly. We've also done conservation of 3 different paintings that the city owns. And you all are well aware the city owns quite a few paintings. So open space, I'm going to talk about the project categories. Open space is defined here. And again, all of this is within the plan, so you can always refer back to it. But open space is more the purchasing of land in open space, not necessarily recreational opportunities. That's what the recreation category is more for. And that's for trails and parks and playgrounds, athletic fields, and we've done quite a bit of work across the city. Various parks and playgrounds, Dias Field, Lights at Buttonwood, the Sergeant Sean Gannon Playground up in the North End at Campbell School. It's quite a list that the CPA has funded over the last 5 years. Historic preservation. Now, this is something I wanted to make you all aware of. If you have a historic preservation project that you are considering, it has to be already either listed on the State Register of Historic Places, or it has to be determined by the local historic commission to be significant in its history, archaeology, architecture, or culture of the city. The way you do that is you contact Ann Lauro, who is the Assistant Director of Planning and the Preservation Planner for the city, and her phone number is the same as my phone number, which is on the front of the application. And you have a conversation with her tomorrow or Friday or Monday or Tuesday to start the process, because she will have to bring that before the Historic Commission in either October or November, depending on their agenda, so that the determination can be made about whether or not your building or your object or what have you is historic to the history, archaeology, architecture, or culture of our city. So that's an important thing. So if you're looking for historic preservation funding, please have a conversation with Ann within the next week so that you can start that process. You do not need to have that significant finding done before you put in the step 1 form at the end of the month, but you will need to have it in process before you submit your application in November. So that's just an important point that I want to make sure everybody understands. Another thing about this is that, as I mentioned before, our city can determine, based on our needs, how we spend the money. And because we're such an historic city, we've spent about 59% of the CPA funds over the last 5 years on historic preservation projects. However, other communities, such as like up in the Cambridge and Boston, or on the Cape, the islands, they spend a larger proportion of their funding on open space and affordable housing, because those are their needs. And that's the beautiful thing about CPA, is that it allows the communities to target the needs that they have in their community, as opposed to being dictated to by the city, the state. Yes?
Hi, Pamela from the Women's Center. You have to pick one, or if you have what you believe is a historically valuable building that's also going to have affordable housing in it, are you on 2 categories, or do you?
That's a really good question. So Pamela's question, for those of you who may not have heard, is do you have to pick a category? So if you have an historic building that you're converting into affordable housing, can you apply under both categories? Yes. Typically what the CPC has done is they have pulled monies from one category for a project, because we've had many projects that have come before us, either for affordable housing and historic preservation, and we typically pull from the one we feel fits the best based on the needs or the project scope. But it doesn't harm your application, it doesn't help your application, it just allows the CPC a little more flexibility in which pool of money they're going to pull from. So it is something that can be done. The next up is community housing. I said it is a little more complicated. I'm happy to talk to anybody about community housing after, or later on next week. You can always call me. We have had a number of projects. The first year we didn't have any community housing projects. And we've had a number of projects, as you all are probably aware of, the rental crisis that is happening in our community and communities across the country, actually. The need for affordable housing, workforce housing, has become very acute. So there are a number of projects that the CPA funding has gone to over the last couple of years to help alleviate some of that crisis here in our community. So restrictions. If you have a board and they will need to sign off, you need to have a conversation with them before you apply that you may need to have a restriction placed upon your property. So in some cases, it could be an open space and outdoor recreation projects, maybe a conservation restriction. An affordable housing restriction may be placed upon it. An agricultural preservation restriction, which we probably won't see one of those in New Bedford for obvious reasons, or a preservation restriction that may be approved by the Mass Historical Commission. That being said, we can have that conversation if you have questions about it before you apply. Please call me. I can explain it to you further and provide you with an example. If we feel that based on your project you need to have a restriction put on, we can have that conversation so that you can go to your board to have that noted, and they understand that that would be something you'd have to enter into. There are several projects that have not had to enter into a restriction because they've already had a preservation restriction, or they already have an affordable housing restriction placed on it. So it'd be redundant for the CPC to then place another one. So, and if it's something that's happening on city property or to city property, the restrictions are typically not enforced because it's city property. So the plan. The plan is a document. It's about 70 pages. Good chunk of it is the instructions that you picked up, and you have examples of the instructions, the eligibility form, and the application. But the rest of it is really about the guiding document that the CPC uses every year to determine what are we going to fund? What is the priority within our community? And that's based on the feedback that they've gotten from the community as well as the boards and commissions. This also has in it past information about last year's applications that were approved. It also has information regarding how they're scored, what the criteria are that the CPC uses. And that's all really good information that you can use as you're thinking about your application and putting it together. So as I mentioned before, it is a two-step process. And the reason we do this is that we want to make sure that whatever you're putting before us, before you do the lengthy application, that it's eligible. Because as we saw in the DOR chart, there are certain allowable uses. And we just want to make sure that your project is eligible. It does not mean that it's going to be awarded money, but it's saying, yes, you are eligible based upon the CPA statute. So that'll be due September 29th by noon. It's emailed. If you go onto the web page, you're going to download that PDF and save it to whatever device you're doing. If you don't do it, it deletes all the information, and I have not figured out how to make it stop doing that. After 6 years, you'd think I could figure that out. So I apologize, but the safest thing is download it, save it to your device, fill it out, and then email it in. I absolutely love when I get them in early and not at 11:59 a.m. on the day they're due. But if that's when they come in, I'm really good with that as well. So, and I'm available to answer any questions that you have about them. And I'm going to go over a little bit more. The Step 2 application, you'll be notified whether you're eligible or not. I will send a letter on behalf of the CPC once they've reviewed them saying, yes, you're eligible, or no, you're not eligible. Here's why. This is how you need to look at your project differently in order to fit within the CPA definitions. And that'll be by October 7th, so I'm doing this off the top of my head. So just a quick review of that. You got the eligibility determination form. You're eligible, great. Send in your application. That'll be due November 9th at noon. Again, 11:59 a.m. It's always very fancy and very, very busy in my office. We'll review those applications. Part of that review also is part of inviting all of the applicants to present before the CPC, and that'll be in January. That will be remote. We are going virtual from October to March again. And at that time also, your proponents can log on and they'll be allowed to speak in support. And obviously, if there's anybody who's against your project, they'll be allowed to speak in opposition. Once that's done, the CPC all scores them. They get together, they review the scores, and they make their determinations for recommendations, which are then put into a nice recommendation packet that's sent to City Council. City Council receives it, sends it to the Finance Committee. Finance Committee then asks questions about the applications. Typically, Jan and I are invited to speak. We always encourage those that are applying to reach out to the City Councilors to make sure that they have all the information they need in order to make an informed decision about your application, because each project is voted on individually. And then once that goes to City Council, goes up to Finance, votes out of Finance to full City Council approves it, then your project is considered awarded, and we'd enter into a grant agreement. And that typically is May, roughly, usually, except for years of COVID or any other things. I'm hoping this year is my year of everything goes the way it's supposed to. So here's the timeline that we just went over. It's in your packet. It's also in online. So you have that, so you can see it's not speedy, unfortunately. It is a process. But once you get to this part, you can start any expenses incurred after that date when the City Council approves, you can start incurring expenses. So this year, I think it was May 12th that we had final approval. So May 13th, if you started your project and you were working on it, from May 13th of 2022 through June 30th, 2023, that is your timeline of when you have for your grant to be completed. So it buys you a little bit of extra time, especially with the construction season. So step one, you need to own it. And if you don't own it, the person who does own it, he needs to give you permission that you can use it or do what you want to do on their property. It's very important that if it's on city property, the responsible department has to be the applicant. So if it's, I don't know, like the art museum. The art museum is a nonprofit, however, they rent from the city. They live in that building. So they had to get permission from DFFM to put the application in. If you want to do something on Parks property, you have to speak with Departments of Parks, Recs, and Beaches in order to get permission and have them be the lead applicant. School department, you would just have to have the permission of the school if you're a school and you want to do a playground. So you'd have to have that. And typically for schools, they are, the school is considered the lead applicant, but internally you'd have to determine who needs to sign off on that. And I have had a couple of other applicants that were schools, so that, I'm happy to walk you through it if you have any questions. So the application. So this is this eligibility determination. I promise you, it is literally one piece of paper, double-sided. Super easy. I need to know that you can receive the funds. So are you a nonprofit, or do you have a fiscal agent that you can work with? Do you have the site control? If you do not have site control, then you're automatically ineligible. City must be the lead applicant. Do you have your determination of historic significance, or are you in the process of getting that? Fantastic. Required property restrictions. You understand that? Great. Word count. Please, my eyes are old. Please no 8-point font. Because what I have to do is then cut and paste what you did, put it on another piece of paper, make it bigger, scan it, and send it to my CPC, who also wear glasses, most of them. So please no 8-point font. As you can see, deadline. I'm really serious. If it's not there by noon, it's considered late. We have to have a cutoff. So it needs to be noon on the 25th, the 29th. Oh my gosh, wrong date. So project title, it does not need to be fancy. It does not need to be long. Shorter is better because I have to put it on a folder. So, and it has to go in our system. So short and sweet is fine with us. It does not need to be fancy. Where it's located, because sometimes the project location is a different address than where your business or your nonprofit is located. Your applicant, if you have a co-applicant, then what kind you are. A city board, a nonprofit, a private individual. Who's going to be the contact person? Mailing address, telephone number, email, please. Who's the legal record, owner of record? Who owns the property? Is the applicant the owner? Great. And then allowable uses. And as Pamela had asked, yes, you can check off more than one. So if you were going to be buying open space that you want to turn into a park, and you are working with the city on that, and that's in the case of Abolition Row Park, it could be considered both. Then the back side. So I told you it was literally one piece of paper. What's your estimated budget for the project, and what's your estimated request? This is the only thing you can change from when you send in your eligibility determination to when you apply. Because once you send in your eligibility, then you're going to start getting quotes. And sometimes what you estimate is not reality, especially in this last year when all the prices have skyrocketed for literally everything, every service, every vendor. So this one you can come up with that number, and then as you do your due diligence and put together your application, if those numbers change, that's fine. Next up is, for historic preservation projects only, you need to answer these questions about whether or not you've made a determination. And then project description. So this is where really please, no less than 10-point font and 500 words. I do not need to know about your organization's background. I don't need to know about your mission. I just need you to tell me that you are XYZ nonprofit and your goal for this grant application is to create a new recreational opportunity by doing a new playground at X school, or you're a nonprofit that is working with working to create recreational opportunities in the community for our historic preservation, we're XYZ nonprofit, and we want to conserve and digitize our collection of X. Whatever it is, it's short and sweet. Yes?
I just got a quick question. The building, Bill Nedwich from the Fort Table Fort Roger Military Museum, president. And the thing about it is, it says the building that we use is owned by the city.
Yep.
But everything within the building belongs to the museum, the Historical Association.
Okay.
Now, it's nothing to do with the building that we'd be working on, the items within the museum. Do we still need to get
No.
the city? Okay.
So the project you're looking, so he's asking about whether or not he needs to involve the city, because they are in a city-owned building. However, the items within the walls are owned by them. So if your project is specifically for those resources, metals, paintings, anything of that is owned by your nonprofit, you do not need to get the city involved, because it's not the building that you're working on, it is the objects that you're working on.
Okay,
So that's, yeah.
Now, there's another thing. Now, this is just a single project, or if it's more than one items within the museum will need to be preserved?
We can talk about it, but if it's two different items, it depends on what if you want to do two different items, one's a painting and one was the other.
46-star flag.
I think
tough
two.
questions.
I think two would be best,
Okay.
because it'd be two different items. It's two different historic resources.
Okay.
So it'd be two different items, and you'd have two different, because one's fabric and one's painting.
Right.
You'd have two different types of conservators working on it. You wouldn't be able to get,
Okay.
if it was two paintings, I would say just put it in one, but because it's gonna be two types of conservators, because very rarely do you have somebody who works in fabric and paintings. So I would say it's two applications in your case.
Okay. All right. I appreciate it.
Yep, not a problem. So super, super easy. We try to make it as easy as possible, because we wanted to make this process as streamlined as possible for organizations, both the small volunteer organizations and our larger nonprofits that have professional staff. We wanted to make sure that CPA funding was available for everybody. So that's why we tried to do it short and sweet. You have to do one of these. If you do not do an eligibility determination form, you will not be able to put in an application. Even if you put in an application, we won't review it. You have to do step one first. Step two, we're asking a little bit more of you, and this is why we go through step one, is to make sure that what you're doing is eligible before you go through the process of applying. Clear, concise, it can be bullet points, it does not need to be a narrative. Just provide us with the information. Whoops. You have to look at the preservation plan and see, does it fall within the preservation plan? And see if what you want to do meets the goals. And you can always call me if you have any questions about that. If you have multiple applications, we ask that you prioritize them. There's a couple of departments that put in applications from the city, and every year we ask them to prioritize, so that we know what's your number one priority, 2, 3, 4, prioritize for them for us. Because if we're in a situation where we don't have enough money, the CPC wants to know what's your number one priority of the applications you've put in. We have had other nonprofits who had multiple projects, and they've prioritized this as well for us. Applications. So, yay, no COVID right now, or very minimal COVID, no restrictions. So this year, I will need a digital copy on a flash drive of all your application materials. Your application as a PDF, all the supporting documents, and they're going to be saved in a certain way to make the review process more streamlined for the CPC members. Because they typically spend about 30 hours in meetings reviewing, and that doesn't also include the 8+ hours that they review these applications aside from the meetings. So I try to make it as streamlined as possible. I'm also going to need 12 double-sided, 3-hole punch copies of just the application to provide to them. It enables them to have something that they can review, write notes on, things of that nature. Late or incomplete submissions will not be considered. Part of the thing is you need to provide quotes for the work that you're asking the CPC to fund. The CPC does reserve the right to ask for additional materials or clarification as they go through and review your materials, but you have to have that in with the deadline. So the submission checklist, when I was referring to how you organize it on the flash drive, you're going to make a folder that says application, one that says financial, one that says ownership, etc., and put those documents that are underneath that, if applicable, in each of the folders. It just makes it so much easier for the CPC to review. They know exactly where to go for a particular document. Then here they are again. I know it's picky, but after 6 years of doing this, we've kind of streamlined it so that it makes it easier for the members. And it also helps you because then you know exactly what you have provided us. So the process. In your project narrative, you're going to talk about what the project is. How does the community, what's the need in the community? How does the community benefit? What are your goals and objectives in doing this project? How are you going to measure if it's successful? Is it the use of this particular facility that you're doing, or preserving something that might otherwise deteriorate beyond the ability to be saved by a conservator? What kind of community support you have? Community support letters are fantastic. It shows the CPC that you have the support of the community, that there is an interest in doing this and spending these taxpayer dollars on your particular project. And you can provide those with the application. In addition, when we have the presentations, you also can have your supporters talk and speak in favor of your project. And that is very helpful, and it is, a lot of the times, it's very compelling. And it provides the CPC with insight into how the community feels about your project. And then, is it a critical need? Is the roof caving in? You're risking that this resource is going to deteriorate past the point of being saved? What's the need in the community for that? And there's prompts that you can't really read because apparently that's not a great copy, but there's prompts there that kind of ask questions so you can be thoughtful when you give the answers. And again, it can be bullet points. It does not have to be a narrative. And again, please note 8 points. Project management. So we want to know, what's your capacity? Can you handle this? Is there somebody that you're working with that can help you with this? A lot of times we have historic preservation projects that are working in tandem with either outside vendors or another nonprofit. In case in point, First Baptist Church is a joint project of Whale and Your Theater. Your Theater is a community group, theater group. They really didn't have the historic preservation experience. Whale did. They partnered, and now a resource that was pretty close to being gone is now being preserved. So it's okay if you're partnering with an organization. It's in fact encouraged, because if you don't have the expertise, find the expertise. If you're working with an architect or a conservator or somebody, that helps us to understand if you have the capacity to bring your project through completion. How feasible is your project? How are you going to maintain it after we do this, if we give you the money? And then for historic projects, ADA or community housing, there's a specific page that you have to answer those questions. And that, again, gives the information that the CPC needs to review your application. And then last, project information. So there's a project schedule up here. Well, first of all, there's a whole page where you can put project financial information, and you can talk about if you've gone after other funding. If you've gone after other funding and you're leveraging the funding, that's fantastic. We know that not every nonprofit can leverage other funding and has access. Not every project has, there's not always sources of funding for certain projects, like for design work. A lot of times funders are like, well, what's your design? Well, I need the money to do the design. Well, we're not going to give you the money for the design, and we won't give you money for the project unless you have a design. So it's a catch-22. So a lot of the CPA projects, especially for Parks and Recreation, we've funded design work. That enables Parks and Rec to then take the design to other funders and say, here's our design, can you fund us? So it's giving them a leg up. But if you're fundraising, if you're a small nonprofit and you don't have a huge fundraising budget, that's okay too. It's nice to see that if you have some skin in the game, But we know that not everybody has the capacity to have that, and that is taken into account when we review your applications. So, project schedule. This is a guesstimate. Do not torture yourselves over this. I get more questions about this than anything else, I swear. It's your best guess at this particular moment in time when you think your project is going to, what your timeline is going to look like. And then the one thing is, so line number 1, which is a New Bedford CPA ask, you can either have it under study or soft costs, acquisition, construction. That number you put in there has to be the same as the number you put on page 1, your ask, because sometimes it's different. So make sure that they match. And then you can also, if you have additional funding sources, you can add them here, like a grant from another organization or private fundraising that you may have done, but listed in that. And then your anticipated funding source summary is also funding resources, and then the status of the funding. Like say you applied for a grant with Mass Historic Commission or something, or like through a community foundation, something like that. And you can just say when you anticipate you'll get the answer to that. The thing you do need to remember is that you need at least 2 quotes or 2 detailed cost estimates, because the CPC needs to see that you've done your due diligence and that you have an accurate idea of how much you're going to need to spend on this particular project. Because I cannot tell you how many times we have seen quotes that are significantly different and we're not quite sure which one's the most accurate. And it's significant difference. So if we do the low end, can you still do the project? If we do the high end, are we giving you too much money and you're not going to spend it all? And especially in the years, which pretty much every year has been, we've always had more ask than we were able to give. So they're very conscious of not over awarding, and they don't want to under award because we want the projects to move forward. And then construction projects. Anybody have a construction project? So construction projects, you may already have a budget that you have that your architect and your team has put together. That will suffice. You do not need to reinvent the wheel here. It's perfectly fine to provide the one that's already put together by your architectural team. And then the vote of corporation and tax compliance certification. If you are a municipal department or partnering with a municipal department, the municipal department does not need to provide this. This is for external nonprofits only, but I need this. So this here is your board of directors of whatever organization votes on this day that whoever this person is, which is what their title is allowed to. And then this is usually your clerk of your board or your board president or something like that. This person is also going to sign your application and will also complete your tax compliance certification. This person and this person cannot be the same. The purchasing department frowns upon that. So it needs to be 2 different people. So typically it's your executive director or your president of your board, if that's who your point person is going to be, and then your clerk. And that needs to be provided with the application. So procurement. For those of you who know procurement, because you work in the municipal world, procurement, just be aware of it. For those of you who are not in the municipal world, you do not need to worry about procurement. Prevailing wage does not apply, procurement does not apply unless it is being done, unless the project involves a municipal property. So you can just look at this and go, thank goodness, I don't have to deal with that. So how can you write your grant agreement, or your grant application so that the CPC gets all the information and you answer all the questions? So the things that they're looking for is it eligible? Does it have a public benefit? Does it align with our plan? Is it a good use of public resources? Because at the heart of it, this is taxpayer money that we want to use for the betterment of our community. So we want to know, is it a good use? So this is the more detailed review of what the application review is like. They get them in November. I give them a nice binder and their flash drive, and I send them on their way and say, start reviewing. And they go through these applications in preparation of our January presentations. And the things we're looking for is, is it complete? Do you meet the primary evaluation criteria, which I think I have a slide for that? Does it meet some of the secondary evaluation criteria? How about the category goals? How well developed is it? What kind of capacity do you have as an organization? Those are all things that we take into account when we're looking at your application. And then the public presentation, typically I review all these applications before they even look at them. And there will be times when I reach out to the applicants and say, I read it, this is what I'm missing, do you have this, can you provide this? So that I can provide it to the CPC before they even get into your applications, so that it's as complete as a package as possible for them. But then during the public presentations, they'll have gone through and they may have questions that I missed or didn't realize that yes, we should have gone down that road and asked that question. So the public presentations are an opportunity for you to do your 5-minute elevator speech about why your project is so amazing and serves such a public benefit, and here's why it's great. And then you get, the CPC has an opportunity to do a Q&A. And then, like I said, your supporters or those who are maybe in opposition are allowed to speak in support or opposition of your project. I won't read them. They're in the plan. You can also this is on the website as well, so you can go through this if there was something you missed. But your primary criteria and your secondary criteria, and those questions, these are how the CPC is looking at your application. How does it fit? How does it answer these questions? And then they score based on that. And then there's 3 ways you can receive. You can either get recommended for funding, accepted for future consideration, or not recommended for funding. If you're recommended for funding, that goes to City Council. And when we send it to City Council, it is the name of the project, it is what category it's coming out of, and how much the CPC is recommending. It may or may not be the full amount you've asked for. Last year, I think we had 17 projects. 15 of them we were able to fund in full. That was the first time in 5 years we've ever been able to do that. Ever. Typically, we fund somewhere between 75 and 85% of an ask on average. So just something to keep in mind. And then notification. So you'll get a notification that I received your eligibility determination. Then you'll get a notification saying you are eligible or you're not. I will send a reminder saying, and you'll get your application PDF again, download the PDF, save it, fill it out. Then you'll get a reminder, hey, they're due. And then once I get them, you'll come in to drop them off. So I'll have signed and I'll take them from you so we know you've received them. In the past, I've had to do, during COVID, I had to do appointments. This time it's more of a drop-in. Please know that at 11:59 on November 9th, you will wait in line. If I see your face, you're on time. It's okay. But just plan for that. It will not be a quick drop-in run. Then you'll, at that point, I'll ask you, I'll have the dates for the public presentation. First come, first serve. You bring your application in first, you get first crack of what time and what date you want. Just a little incentive, just putting it out there. So then you'll get notification. You will be able to do a small PowerPoint presentation, small, and I'll give you those guidelines, and I will run it for you as you're doing your virtual presentation. We'll notify you once the CPC has said this is who we're going to recommend, and we'll provide you with the funding conditions. The funding conditions could be things like you have to work with the historic planner on X, Y, and Z. You have to do a preservation restriction, but you will have an opportunity to review on behalf of your organization, and if you want, before your board, whatever your internal mechanisms are, to say, yes, we're good with that before we send them to the City Council, because those funding recommendations, once we send them to City Council and City Council votes on them, they are part of your grant agreement. So we cannot easily change them. So we provide you with the opportunity to review them ahead of time to make sure that you are okay with them. So as I mentioned earlier, they go to City Council. City Council can approve, they can reject, or they can reduce. They can't add, and they cannot add a project, nor can they add money to a project. It's whatever recommendations that the CPC has sent. If the city council determines that they're going to reject a particular project or reduce the amount of a project, the CPC has one opportunity to basically appeal that decision. That has happened twice in FY18 and FY22. And the appeal was, fortunately, both projects were fully funded based on the appeal because we provided the information the city council needed in order to make the final decision. After that's done, we do a grant agreement or an MOA. If you're an outside organization, you get a grant agreement. If you're an internal department, you get an MOA. Every project that's funded, every 3 months, you must provide me with a project status report, even if you say, yeah, we didn't do anything, we're waiting on X. But I have to have a project status report because I report out to the CPC because they get questions in the community from people who say, hey, you guys funded X, Y, and Z. How's that going? Did you spend that money yet? So I provide them with the information so that they have the answers that they need. Funding is a phased disbursement. We usually hold 10% back at the end, so that once we do the project closeout report, and if I do have to do a site visit, then we release that final 10%. And of course, because it's a grant agreement, there is a recapture provision. So if money is spent on something that is not within the scope of the grant agreement, then you have to pay it back if we had already reimbursed you for it. And acknowledgement. So surprisingly enough, there are still people in the community who don't see the value of CPA. As I mentioned earlier, we've given out just over $6.8 million and we've brought in $6.9 million. And that's only about 17 out of the 50-something projects that have been funded. Once the rest of them close and do their final reports, I anticipate that that'll jump probably another $3 million because we have housing projects that are included in that. It's an extraordinary thing that CPA does in bringing money into our community, both through the state match and through leveraging funding, because if some of the funders see that they have local support, then they're more willing to give money to a particular project. Or in some cases, we're the match so that it enables them to get the other grant. So it's important to provide these funds to help projects succeed in our community. So we ask that one of the things that you do is we have these really fancy signs that we let you borrow. Pamela actually has one out in front of the Gilbert Russell House. If anybody knows the Gilbert Russell House, the pink building on County Street, and just got restored because of Pamela and her board's amazing stewardship. They came to us a few years ago, and CPA funds have done the vast majority of that. Roachstone's Duff House. The rest of fancy restoration work at the Wamsutta Club that you really can't see because a lot of it's the roof, which is necessary because leaking is bad. These amazing buildings that now host organizations that are doing amazing work in our community now have weather-tight, beautiful exteriors to continue to do the work that they are doing inside. Because my favorite quote is Pamela's when she says that most of the funders think that organizations such as hers do their work in a yurt in the middle of Butwood Park and don't realize that the buildings that they do it in are just as important sometimes as the services that they're doing within the walls. So we just ask that you all acknowledge that the CPA provides this funding where others funders don't. And if you have a fancy plaque like this fancy one, that'd be really nice if you put us in there. The CPC also loves to go to ribbon cuttings and things of that nature. And also, if, you know, the Standard Times or New Bedford Guide or any of the other New Bedford Cable Access interviews you and you say, where did you get your funding? Well, one of our biggest funders was CPA. Because then those in the community realize that the money that they see, that little tiny, like 1.5% that they see on their tax bill is, I don't even know how many fold, is doing amazing work in our community. So that's our webpage. It has everything on it. The plan, the report, last year's applications, this fancy PowerPoint that I did. and the eligibility determination form for you to download, because I do ask that you download it and send me an electronic copy. We meet here usually, but we're going back to virtual, and we do post that on our agenda, so you're always welcome to join us. I am always available for questions. Email I'm usually faster than voicemail these days, but I'm always happy to walk you through, and no question is too small or you think should be obvious. I'm happy to walk anybody through the process. So I hope I've answered everybody's questions, but I will open up the floor if anybody has any questions about the process or anything that I may have covered a little too quickly. Yes.
No, I'm having to get that certified as a historic thing. I can still submit the eligibility
Yes.
before it gets done.
Yes. So he's asking about the certificate that it's deemed historically significant, and that's through the Historic Commission. So Dan Lauro would be the person you speak with, and as long as you've started the process, and I would suggest you start it next week, so you can get either on the October or November agenda, because I know her next meeting is this month is the 12th, and that agenda is already full and published. Have that conversation with Dan next week, so that you can start the process. And as long as it's in process, it's fine, because she and I work in the same office, we work together on these things. So as long as I know that it's moving forward and I'll have it, say after the November meeting, we'll just put it with your application. But I think her November meeting is before the deadline. So, okay. Pamela, do you have a question?
Yeah, just the two signs that you showed, the plaques. Do you
Yes.
have those in the JPEG that we could get, because we're doing our annual report, and I kind of want to put that
Yes.
next to a picture of the historic building.
Sure.
That would be great.
Great. Okay. Does anybody else? Yes.
On the board authorization, do you have to, can you get the board authorization if you're only in the eligibility phase before you're doing the application?
Sure.
Or you can do
Yeah.
that? It doesn't
Yeah,
matter the
absolutely.
date?
So
Okay.
the question was, can you get the authorization if you anticipate that you're going to have a historic preservation or some kind of preservation restriction, if you can get it before, while you're in the eligibility phase? Absolutely. As long as it's a vote of your board, if that's what your bylaws state, that they have to authorize you to move forward because they understand that this restriction will be placed if you receive this funding. Absolutely, get it now, because it's in your minutes, it's there, and if anybody asks, you can say, I had permission. So it's perfectly fine to start it as soon as possible. So, did anybody else have any questions? No? Well, that wasn't bad, it's 6:59. So thank you so very much. And if you have any questions, I'm here, I can stay, or you can call me, or email me. And I appreciate everybody's time tonight. Thank you. Good luck.
Did you know that you can watch any of New Bedford Cable Network shows anytime, anywhere on all of your mobile devices? How, you may ask? Just log on to nbcablenetwork.com and bam! You have all 3 channels at your fingertips: public, educational, and government access. Here, you can view our program schedules, watch our channel's live broadcasts, or search for a particular program in our vast library of shows. Last year alone, New Bedford Cable Network produced over 500 shows, and nearly all of them are available online at nbcablenetwork.com. Not only can you stay up to date with what's happening in your local government and schools, but also dive into some of New Bedford Cable Network's original award-winning programs. So check us out at nbcablenetwork.com.